It was an ordinary winter day. The snow was falling softly on the streets, and I was looking forward to the end of the working day to return home and spend the evening with my family. I didn't even realize that this day would change my whole life. It all started with an unexpected call. My phone rang and my brother's name appeared on the screen. I was surprised, since he rarely called me at this time. I picked up the phone, and his voice, trembling and full of horror, pierced my heart. "Jessica, Dad was in an accident." His words echoed through my mind, making my heart stop. "What happened? How did it happen?" I asked, feeling panic wash over me. He was driving home from work when he lost control on a slippery road. The car rolled over several times and crashed into a tree. "Dad is in the hospital. His condition is critical." I couldn't believe my ears. My father, so strong and always confident, was now fighting for his life. I immediately rushed to the hospital without even telling the boss. All I thought about was seeing him and knowing that he was going to be okay. When I got to the hospital, my mother met me. Her face was pale and tear-stained. We hugged, and I felt her body tremble with tears. "Mom, how is he? What did the doctors say?" I asked, trying to hold back the tears. "They're doing their best, but the chances are slim," she replied, her voice trembling. "They said that he had lost a lot of blood and suffered serious injuries." We sat waiting for the news, and the time seemed endless. Eventually, the doctor came up to us. His face was serious and sympathetic. "Your father, he didn't survive. We did everything we could, but the injuries were too serious," he said. These words sounded like a sentence. I felt the world crumbling around me. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I hugged my mom, trying to find comfort in her arms, even though I was devastated. When I got home, I felt like I was in a daze. All my thoughts were only about Dad, how he was always there for me and supported me. I couldn't believe he was gone. Later, when I told Michael about what had happened, his reaction amazed me. "We'll manage," he said indifferently, not even trying to hide his irritation. "But why does your mother have to move in with us? This will create so many problems." "Michael, she lost her husband. She needs time to recover. I can't leave her alone," I replied, trying to contain my anger. "Okay, so be it," he reluctantly agreed, but I didn't even suspect that this would be the beginning of the end. The tragedy not only took my father away, but also opened my eyes to the true face of the man I lived with. I couldn't imagine that this was just the beginning of a long journey full of betrayal and pain. Mom came to us a week after the funeral. That day, for the first time, I felt how much our lives had changed. I stood at the window, looking out at the snow-covered street, and thought that now the three of us would have to cope. My mother has always been an example of fortitude and kindness for me. Tall, with gray hair neatly arranged in a bun and warm blue eyes, she always knew how to find words of comfort. But now her eyes were full of pain and fatigue. When I met her at the door, she tried to smile, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Mom, welcome," I said, hugging her. "I'm so glad you're with us now." "Thank you, Jessica. I'll try not to be a burden," she replied, entering the house. Michael was sitting in the living room, watching the news on his tablet. He was a tall man with short cropped blonde hair and brown eyes that often seemed cold and distant. When he looked up at his mother, his face expressed a mixture of annoyance and displeasure. "Hello, Mrs. Smith," he said coldly. "I hope you'll settle in quickly." "Thanks, Michael," Mom replied quietly, trying not to notice his tone. The evening passed in a tense atmosphere. My mother and I sorted out her things and arranged for her in the guest room. I noticed how she tried to be as quiet as possible so as not to disturb Michael. In her eyes, I saw fear and uncertainty, which had previously been unusual for her. When we finally sat down to dinner, Mom tried to start a conversation. "Michael, Jessica told me that you got a promotion at work. It is wonderful," she said, trying to sound friendly. Yes, but it takes a lot of time and effort, he replied dryly, without looking up from his plate. I hope your relocation will not become an additional burden. I'll try not to get in the way, Mom replied, her voice trembling. I felt anger building inside me. Michael had never been so rude, but now his annoyance and dislike of his mother were becoming more and more obvious. After dinner, when Mom went to her room, I decided to talk to Michael. Why are you acting like this? She lost her husband. She needs time to recover, I began. I know it's hard for her, but don't you think about how hard it is for us? He replied, putting down the tablet. Our lives have changed, and not for the better. I didn't sign up for this. She's my mother, and I can't leave her. You could have been more understanding, I said, trying to hold back the tears. Michael sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. Okay, Jessica, I'll try. But you have to understand that it's not easy for me, he replied, his voice softening. Thank you, I replied, hoping that he would really try. But every day the situation only worsened. Michael became increasingly detached, spent a lot of time away from home, and was often late at work. I began to notice his secretive phone conversations and text messages, which he quickly deleted. One evening, when I returned home earlier than usual, I found him talking on the phone. Yes, Emily, I miss you too. No, it won't work today. I have things to do at home again, he was saying when I entered the room. Michael quickly ended the conversation when he saw me and tried to hide his nervousness. Who was that? I asked, trying not to show my suspicion. Work colleague, we discussed the project, he replied, avoiding my gaze. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have proof yet. A feeling of anxiety was growing inside me, and I couldn't understand how everything went wrong so quickly. After my father's death, life began to seem like some kind of unreal dream from which I could not wake up. Mom was still in shock, and Michael didn't seem to pay any attention to what was going on around him. In the evening, when I was returning from work, I heard a conversation from the living room. When I entered the room, I saw Michael sitting on the couch and my mom sitting across from him, with a scared expression on her face. What's going on here? I asked, suddenly entering. They both started, as if they had been caught off guard. Mom got up quickly and tried to collect her thoughts. That's okay, Jessica, she stammered. We were just discussing business in the house. Yes, in the house, Michael added, his voice sounding strangely unconvincing. I came closer and looked at them in disbelief. It looks like you were discussing something much more serious. Can you tell me what's going on? I asked, feeling my nerves begin to strain. Mom turned away, unable to meet my gaze. Michael, on the contrary, began to show more and more confidence. Okay, Jess, you'll figure it out sooner or later. We were just discussing the future and what to do with this house, he said, his voice sounding confident, but it seemed to me that there was some mystery in his words. What do you mean, what to do with this house? It was my parents' house, which they left me as a legacy. I don't understand what you're talking about, I said, trying to contain my excitement. Michael sighed and got up from the couch, coming closer to me. Look, Jess, I think it's time for us to tell you the truth. He hadn't finished his sentence when the phone suddenly rang. Michael quickly picked up the phone and whispered a few words before putting the phone down. Sorry, it was my colleague. We need to talk later, he said, looking tense. I felt that something was wrong. Mom's gaze was full of fear, and Michael seemed to be hiding something important. I want to know what's going on, I said, feeling rage and fear boiling inside me. Michael sighed and looked at me with a serious look. Jess, this is not the place to talk. Let's talk about it tomorrow. I promise that we will tell you the whole truth, he said, trying to calm me down. But I was uneasy. I felt like our lives were starting to fall apart, and something sinister was lurking in the shadows. The next day, I was leaving for a work trip, waiting for an evening conversation with my husband and mom. After returning from a trip, I was shocked when I found our family home in ruins. Completely in ruins, without exaggeration. When I came to the ruins, my heart was pounding with horror. My home walls, where I had spent my happiest moments, were now shattered into pieces, like a heart shattered by betrayal. What happened? I asked desperately, cringing in pain. Michael and his father stood next to the heavy machinery, their faces expressing malicious satisfaction. Michael came up to me, his eyes blazing with inhuman coldness. "Now we don't have to live with your mother," he said, the words piercing me like a knife through my heart. "What? Was that you? Did you destroy our house?" I shouted in disbelief. "Yes, it was me. And do you know why? Because I'm tired of living in this house. I'm tired of living with your mother, who constantly interferes in our lives." Michael suddenly screamed, his voice full of disgust. Shaking with rage and resentment, I looked at him with despair. Did you cheat on me?" I asked, not believing my own words. Michael turned away, unable to meet my gaze. "Yes, I cheated on you. I'm tired of this life, of you, of everything," he hissed, as if surrendering to merciless anger. Michael's words tore me apart. I felt like I was losing the last vestiges of faith in humanity. Everything that had once seemed so beautiful and unshakable was now crumbling before my eyes. The decision to take fate into my own hands turned out to be the most difficult step in my life. I didn't imagine that I could overcome all these trials, but I knew that this was the only way to justice. The police, the lawyers, the court, all these words seemed incomprehensible to me and even a little scary. But the worst part was finding out that Michael was selling my mother's stuff. He crossed all boundaries, and I decided that he should pay for his crimes. "Mom, we can do this," my son Jack said, hugging me. "We will fight for justice together." His words gave me strength and confidence that I had chosen the right path. We began to gather evidence against Michael and his family, and each new fact strengthened our resolve. "Mom, this is what I found," Jack said, coming up to me with a stack of papers. "These are records of how Michael and his father hid their income and financial transactions. This could be the key to our victory." I looked at the documents, and my heart began to beat with excitement. That was what we needed. We went to our lawyer to discuss our next steps. "These documents are our main weapon," the lawyer said, looking through the notes. "With them, we have every chance to win in court." We started preparing for the trial, and every day brought new discoveries and evidence. But as the day of the trial drew closer, it became clearer that Michael and his family were hiding even more secrets than I could have imagined. "Mom, they're not going to give up," Jack said, looking at me with concern in his eyes. "We have to be ready for anything." I squeezed his hand in mine and promised that we would cope together. Nothing will stop us in our struggle for justice and truth. On the day of the hearing, my son and I were in a somewhat agitated state, hoping that the hearing would be decided in our favor. My son Jack is 19 years old. He is a student at the university where he studies law. He is a tall and slender young man with intelligent blue eyes that reflect his determination and insight. His blonde hair is slightly tousled, which gives him a casual but stylish look. Jack has always been attached to me. My son and I were very close, supported each other in difficult moments, and shared joy in happy ones. When he found out about what was happening to our family and what my father was doing, he was amazed and outraged. His faith in justice and truth, as well as his deep attachment to family values, made him become my support and helper in the fight against unrighteousness. Jack decided to use his knowledge and skills to help me achieve justice, and he was ready to support me every step of this difficult path. The hearing passed quickly enough, and most of the arguments were in our favor, which made us very happy. After the hearing, The judge ruled that my husband had to compensate for all the costs incurred in connection with the demolition of our house. A couple of days later, in the evening, Jack called me. "Mom, you have to see this," Jack said, entering the room with a paper in his hands. "This is my grandfather's will. You won't believe what he left me." I took the paper from his hands and began to read, not believing my eyes. Jack inherited from his grandfather, my father, the house where my father and mother lived. It was something incredible, and I felt like our lives were getting better, and there was hope for a happy future. "Jack, this is amazing," I exclaimed, hugging him. "Now we have a chance to return to normal life, without the shadow of betrayal and lies of your father." Jack smiled, and his eyes sparkled with determination. "Yes, Mom, we have to act quickly. We cannot give the father the opportunity to interfere in our lives." I felt relieved and grateful. I could finally find peace and tranquility. We were planning to build a new house for my mother and me, and while the construction process is underway, we moved in with my son Jack. He invited me and my mother to live with him, and I agreed, knowing that together we could overcome any difficulties. "I'm proud of who you've become, Jack," I said, hugging him. "And I promise you that I will try my best to support you, and even when my mother and I move into a new house, we will always be in touch and happy to support each other. I will not become like your father, because I love you. We will all be happy, because this is the beginning of our new life."